Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of our new podcast called Finding Her Voice, a monthly podcast by women celebrating women and their voices in film. If you missed it, make sure to check out our first episode where we focused on Jennifer Fang's excellent Advantageous. This month we're taking a little bit more of a traditional route, I guess, and we're talking about How to Make an American Quilt, released in 1995 and directed by Jocelyn Moorhouse. It stars Winona Ryder. The film centers on a character named Finn, a young woman soon to be wed who, fairly feeling aimless, visits her grandmother, her great aunt, and their friends, all passionate quilters. So, a very stark change from Advantageous. Before we get to that film, though, let me kick things off with my co-hosts, Gabby and Alana, by asking, what was the best female-directed film you've seen in this last month?
Well, I'm always ashamed by how little I watch of female-directed films, but this isn't a first-time watch for me, but I watched American Psycho again, so that would be my best film directed by a woman. The first time I saw it, I didn't know it was directed by a woman. I was just at a friend's house, and she put it on, and I was like, I just watch it, and I was like completely horrified, but in an entertaining way. And then I decided to rewatch it just because, when I later found out, I was like, oh, I kind of want to watch it from kind of like this new information I have. So, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think she really nails kind of like the egocentric culture of men, and it made it funny. So,
I actually didn't know that it was directed by a woman, so I have to go back and rewatch it from that perspective.
Right.
I've never seen it, so it's perpetually on my to-watch list, but I just never feel up to it.
You really have to be in a certain mood. It's nuts, and I mean, it's not like my favorite movie of all time, but it does have its like great moments. Like there's this scene with business cards that like kills me every time.
Oh, it's perfect.
Yeah.
This might be kind of a cop-out, but I finally watched Big, directed by Penny Marshall. Obviously, my whole life, everybody's, you have to watch Big, and there's so many iconic scenes from it. So I was kind of on an 80s kick, rewatching some old stuff, and I was like, I should probably watch Big and kind of get what everybody's talking about. And there's so many references, like looking back, in modern films that I'm like, oh, that's from Big. Like, I get that now.
If you're on an 80s kick, can I recommend Desperately Seeking Susan then? Because
really? I haven't seen that.
Because
Yeah,
that's
it's really
also
good.
a female-directed film, and I just watched it recently and I loved it. But my favorite female-directed film of the last month, and I saw a lot of new ones actually, which I was pretty happy about, but this is an older one, like 10 years or so. Things We Lost in the Fire by Claire Denis, and it was excellent. I absolutely loved it. It stars Halle Berry and Benicio del Toro, and I don't know, it like made me really emotional. I loved it a lot. So it's on Netflix right now, and it's worth a watch. And Benicio del Toro is super handsome in it, so shallow moment, but it's good. But yeah, so those are all really great picks. I love all those movies. Well, not American Psycho because I haven't seen it, but good moment. But so yeah, to get focused on our movie pick this month, what did you guys think? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Were you kind of like me and it was kind of a meh movie?
I liked it. I didn't really like the ending.
No.
I just thought I mean, based off everything that, led up to it, it was kind of like, really? But I did like the flashback scenes. I kind of liked learning about each character. That was interesting to me, and but I kind of wish we had more time with the older women and saw them see how they, interacted with each other, because I felt like we saw some of that, but it wasn't, I don't know, to the extent that I was like wanting.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I had read the novel probably 6 or 7 years ago, so I'm not super I don't remember if it's like a direct kind of adaptation of the novel, but I know that there was the same like feeling. I guess the emotion in the film carried over from the novel, but I do agree. I wanted more out of the film than I got, and I think there was just something missing out of it. So it kind of just fell in the middle for me. It wasn't like super great. It wasn't the worst movie I've ever seen by any means,
Or
but it was kind of just average. I think the things that it made me think about were more interesting than the film itself.
Sure. And I agree. I do think the ending kind of negated the entire message they had been leading to up until that point. And as somebody who kind of unabashedly loves films like this, I was disappointed because I usually relate in an extent, or I don't, or it's like you find more women characters that you can relate to in films like this that are about family and growing up and, you know, past histories that you share once you're older and everything. And I feel like there's a woman's experience in this film, but I do think the ending, A, was super rushed, and B, backtracked on like everything she had learned so far. That and I thought as much as I love Winona Ryder, and especially 90s Winona Ryder, because that gave me Joe March and Little Women, I thought she was underdeveloped. But I wanted to jump off from this and talk about this idea about this type of movie. Because I feel like critics seem to turn their noses down on films like this. You know, films like Divine Secrets of Yaya Sisterhood or Under a Tuscan Sun, where it's very much women's stories and it's about women finding themselves. And, you know, I'm wondering, is it in fact because they are frivolous films or because they're quote unquote women's stories? Because when you look at it for this movie, of the 22 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, 5 of them were by women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think it's not because they're frivolous. I think it's because they're women's stories. And I think a lot of critics judge films on how they can relate to them. And since the majority of critics are male, they, I mean, they cannot relate to it in the same way a woman can. And that's just how it is. I mean, I'm not saying they can't relate to it at all, but it's not going to be at the same level as a woman. So I definitely think it's kind of disregarded in that way. And it shouldn't be because even as I was watching it, I was like missing those kind of films because we don't really get them anymore. I mean, we got them a lot in the 80s and 90s. I mean, because these were the movies that my mom would drag me to as a kid to see. So, and now it's like you barely get them. And if you do get them, they're like hollow shells of what they used to be. Like I saw Mother's Day and that was just atrocious.
Exactly, though. That's a good point. It's the same thing I feel like with the romantic comedy, in a maybe a lesser extent because we have independent romantic comedies these days being released. But I do think that because there was like, what if, because there were kind of harsh critics against these type of films, like that is why they don't get made anymore. And the stories are still valuable. It's not like people don't care about family in 2016. I feel like those are types of movies that could still draw a big audience, but because they got either reviewed negatively or maybe they didn't make enough money, Hollywood's like, oh, well, people don't want to see women's stories. Not to say that this movie deserved, 100%. But I think there are comparable films of the male experience directed by men that get better ratings simply due to that. Or because, yes?
Sorry, that was exactly what I was wanting to touch on. So I got excited when you mentioned that.
No, go ahead. Awesome.
Yeah, there's this idea that like female or female centric relationships, particularly like the friendships that we saw in this film, very strong friendships that have long histories or very deep roots, they're seen or portrayed or kind of imagined as thin or meaningless. And I guess there's this kind of like misconception or even a fantasy, I guess, if you could describe it like that, that all women do in a friendship is go to brunch or go shopping and drink wine and gossip and talk about nothing, or talk about boys, and that's it. And that media or society or whoever is, I guess, putting this kind of lens on these relationships, they're making it seem very shallow. And more than that, they're making it seem like they're not as interesting as male friendships, which are often seen as more active in comparison, which is so untrue because look at how many frivolous male stories there are that are just lauded as, oh, they're amazing and they're fantastic. And so you guys can think of some just right off the cuff. And we can watch these stories about male friendships, and there's no questions, and there's no hesitations, or kind of walking light-footed around them. And I think that's one point about how we view female versus male, I guess, friendships or relationships in films. And then the other point that stems from that, and that's was kind of what I was thinking about watching this film, was if this was men in this setting doing whatever, that if a woman were to watch this film or any other male-centric film that feature kind of male stories, people think that they're more complex film watchers. That, oh, she's a cool girl that likes what other men like, and like, you know, focusing on men, and that being into what men are into and liking these male-centric pieces of media somehow makes a woman more intelligent or more capable of thought and discussion, and I guess more valid in their knowledge of film.
No, that's very true.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think that's remarkably true. Even when I read something online the other day, where somebody was pointing out the idea that I wonder how the historical film canon of what we consider to be classic films, how would it have changed if women's voices in criticism had had a bigger platform? Like, if we'd been able to make the shots just as much. Like, would Fight Club be regarded as a classic? Would Pulp Fiction be regarded? Like, what films would and wouldn't make the list? Again, not to imply that How to Make an American Quilt would be on that list.
No.
It's a great film. But I think films like Little Women would be on my all-time classic.
Definitely.
Films like My Brilliant Career, I think Agnes Varda would be higher up there, So I do think that films like this, films like, again, the Yaya Sisterhood, which I keep mentioning because that's kind of what I expected this to be, and I loved Yaya Sisterhood. That one, made me cry. So, I feel like we need to give focus to these directors who show promise and talent, maybe make a misstep with a film like this, but that doesn't mean they're a bad filmmaker. It means they can make a bad or a less than great film. And I think by celebrating those voices, you offer up the chance to see them make a classic. It's not like every great director that's highly regarded, hit a home run out of the first film, So I don't know. It's so interesting to me because, again, I feel like, we view historical cinema based through a largely male gaze. So I don't know how I got there, but it's true.
Well, it is true. I mean, we do see that a lot in film, and I think that's what makes these kind of movies, a different feel to watch. I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed this film, but again, I think it was mostly because I was kind of marveling by all the actresses who were in it. So I was like, because I didn't look at the IMDb first. I was like, oh my God, there's Maya Angelou. Oh my God, it's Anne Bancroft.
I know. And these are the movies that give those kind of meaty roles to older actresses also. So it's nothing, it is important to celebrate films that simply are also celebrating women. And I think that's part of the reason why I look at this movie favorably, is the idea that the cast is largely made up with women with big character moments coming from long discussions between said women. And, how often do we see this, where there's character building just between two women having a chat? I feel like it's usually through action. And I think with this film, what was so great is that, all the women are there to help each other and to help discover their stories and heal after their lifetimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely think, especially like, I mean, I grew up with like being around a bunch of old ladies all the time, and because of my grandma and when her sisters would come to visit from Mexico, and they would just like sit around and talk like about anything, and never really their husbands. I don't think my grandma ever talked about my grandpa. Like she just had nothing interesting to say. So sorry, Grandpa. But yeah, so they would just talk about like whatever and like either the past or what's going on now or gossip or whatever. And I think it really, sometimes they were really deep conversations, and as a kid, I mean, you kind of pay attention, but at the same time, you're just like, you know, hanging around. So, but that reminded me a lot of it, and I think that's why I wanted more from the film because I felt like I got a lot out of that growing up, and I felt like Winona Ryder did not get anything from it. Like, what the hell?
She learned nothing.
The long discussions that are in the film, I think we don't see it a lot in film. The thing is, we see it a lot in real life. It happens in real life all the time. I think
Right.
that the female friendships that I have had and the female friendships I've seen my sister or my mom have, definitely these big, rich discussions that they have. And sometimes they're not rich, sometimes they're just very catching up and chatting. But I think the way that it reflects reality is really interesting and it's nice to see. But the fact that it falls so flat towards the end and doesn't really carry through is disappointing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we can talk about more about the ending towards the end here too, because I want to dig into it also. Um, but I did want to talk about, in this film, again, there's kind of the expectations of marriage and children put on our leading character, Finn. Um, and then we see how, you know, patriarchy has influenced all the women's relationships with men throughout the years, be it, the idea that men are allowed to sleep around under the guise of boys will be boys, you're expected to do it, they can't control themselves, or women becoming less desirable once becoming mothers and being forced to give up their dreams while, the husband gets to pursue their career. And, I was wondering, like, how do you think that was represented overall? Because, is that negated by the fact that a lot of the women's conversations are about their husbands and men, or because they're talking about it in a way that shows how it was damaging, does it make it a little bit more progressive, even though it was 20 years ago?
I mean, I thought it was rather progressive for the fact that I mean, you left those flashbacks not thinking well of their husbands, of their like you feel bad for them that they kind of got stuck in that situation just because of the way of the way society was, the pressures, the what they were kind of forced to do by everyone else, and so I definitely like left it feeling like these women had more to their lives. Like they had hopes and dreams beyond being a wife and a mother. And they all feel that regret. I mean, that's what I felt from each flashback scene. And um, so I think that was interesting because it wasn't really celebrating their marriages or their lives. It was just kind of saying, like, this is what we did, you know? I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
No, I agree that I don't know if I would say it came out like in a positive light, but I was, I'm curious if, like, wouldn't it have been nice to have a flashback just centered on, the sisters instead of the sisters, the husband. But I agree. I do think overall, especially for a film in the 90s, it was nicely progressive in that fact, which does make the ending more frustrating.
Right.
But again, we'll get to that. But I was wondering also, we touched on the amazing actresses in this film, and I was wondering, how do you think they did for writing elderly characters, women above 50, which can be a crapshoot. It's either you're Meryl Streep and you're getting really meaty roles, or you're playing like the kooky grandma, or you're just kind of thinly drawn. So I was wondering, do you think they represented them well? Do you think there was something to be desired?
I think it kind of goes along with the whole feel of the film. There was a little bit left to be desired. I don't think they were written poorly or super fantastically. I think that it was kind of just like, these are characters and they're good characters, but I really wanted a lot more than what we were given. I guess in the context of the film and in the context of the story, I think that they were really enjoyable characters, but I definitely did want more. And that might just be me being selfish and being used to older characters that are written like super well. I think that I just wanted a little bit more.
Well, I think if you like compare it to the roles for older women now, I mean, especially if you think in terms of ensemble, because we don't really get a lot of ensemble old women or older people. I mean, the last one I could think of is like the Exotic Marigold Hotel, which is like full of just different personalities, in a room together. But this one, I think I like these characters, and I wish we got to know them more, like outside of just a single flashback scene that we got for each of them. And again, like, I wanted to see kind of the dynamic between them. Like, I was really intrigued by, the relationship between Anne Bancroft's character and Maya Angelou's character. They were friends, and I wanted to see more of that bond that we saw in the flashback and we saw, in the present. The same thing with the two sisters. Like, I think, I would have been more interested to see kind of how, they kind of work through, that betrayal and all that. And so that was stuff that I would have liked to see more of, and that I was kind of hoping we would get. But, yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, well, the stories about the men were progressive. It wasn't very progressive to just keep it to the stories of how the men affected their lives.
Sure. No, I agree. And I definitely agree that I would have loved to just see more about the sisters. But that's also because I think that's an area in film and a relationship in film that I want to see more of in general, because I tend to love them. I love, movies like Mustang and, again, Little Women, The Virgin Suicides. I think all those are great films, and I think they operate so well by building those relationships between sisters. And I think and I also I have two sisters, and that's like a very strong part of my identity, so I think that might be why too. But yeah, I would have loved to see more of them. So we should probably talk about this ending, though, that we all seem to think, where she's like, screw it, I'm going to be happy and be with a dude, and it's going to be great. And instead, it really seemed like she should probably go off and, see the world and write and maybe not be tied down yet. In my opinion, that was where, the movie could have gone. It was let me go learn how to be me instead of possibly falling in these patterns.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you learn from each of the women's stories, that they didn't get a chance to, follow their dreams, kind of establish a career or whatever they had planned for their life when they were younger before they got tied up and married and couldn't do it anymore. So, and here's, a young woman who's, going to finish her thesis, and then only because you finish your thesis doesn't mean that you have, your whole life settled. I mean, you still have hopes and dreams, and I mean, again, I understand wanting love to be a part of it, but after hearing all these people's stories, I would have been like, you know what? I'm gonna go travel the world, or I'm gonna figure out my career and have everything I want before I have to settle down and possibly sacrifice a lot of stuff.
Especially for a marriage that she didn't seem to be all that thrilled with.
Right.
We never in the film are given a real moment where we're we get why she's in love with him. We can understand it. I was much more sold on her fling that she was having. Like I was like, okay, well this makes a little sense,
Yeah.
But as much, yeah, I was never sold on it. And not to say that a movie, like I can be fine with a movie that ends with the couple getting together. I love that. I love romantic comedies. But this one, it just seemed like they were building to something more and something more self-reflective. And all it ends up with is like just her with the quilt
Yeah.
and her fiance, which again, it just seemed like it came out of nowhere almost to me.
hmm I think that even if she did end up, if the ending was still she's going to be with him, it would have even just her reaching out to him and saying, I'm going to explore and find myself and I will come back to you, that would be so much more satisfying than just, yeah, like I'll go back to him and everything's fine and all that. I just didn't buy it. Like you guys were saying, I didn't understand their relationship. And I after watching the film and like having so many hopes for her, to see it just kind of be washed down the sink was frustrating.
Yeah.
I agree. And also I'm curious, do you think she ends up telling him that she cheated on him?
No.
Or no?
Um,
See, that also, you know, underlines the romantic reunion.
mm,
So, I don't know. And it also comes off the fact that like she sees her parents getting back together and
mhm,
like that's her indicator that she should. And so it also strips away a bit of her agency, the idea that she's just doing what she's doing because of her mom's influence.
mhm,
Because her mom told her she can't love people means that she can't, so I don't know. I was also really frustrated. And again, Winona Ryder is so good, and she's an actress that I've always loved, and I could watch her in anything. And, like, I think she's trying her hardest to give Finn a semblance of a characterization,
mhm,
especially around all these like Titan actresses. But it all falls flat because she's influenced by what everybody else asks her to do. And I get that her character's aimless because she's writing the world's longest thesis in
Yeah.
but yeah, so I don't know. I was frustrated. Like yeah.
Yeah, like my interpretation of like the end right before, she finds the van or whatever is that okay, she has a blanket, like she has all the love she needs to do what she needs to do.
That's so good.
Right,
That
wouldn't
is
that be
really good,
great?
yeah.
But that's what I felt when they laid it on her. I was just like, see, they gave her love because you don't need a man. You just need us. You need our memories. You need that. And it ended the way it did. So I was disappointed when
Mhm.
she saw the van. I'm like, oh, really? Like, I was like, okay, maybe she'll tell him, like, to take a hike. But no, she didn't.
She didn't.
Or like at the very least, we'll work on it.
Yeah, we'll work
Yeah.
on it. We'll
Something
talk
where
it through.
Yeah, like we'll have our exit. I don't know. It was just kind of a mess. But
Anything but that ending would have been fine.
I know I was so frustrated. Um, but yeah, so I think that's about it for this movie. There's unless Alana did it like I know you said you read it a while ago, but is the ending a little bit more satisfying in the book? Do you remember?
Yes. I mean, I didn't feel as frustrated then as I do now, and I think that might just be because I'm older and have, a different outlook
Sure.
on the world. I think I remember feeling okay. I'm like a little disappointed, but um, coming from the perspective of I think I was 15, 14 or 15 when I read it. Um, I guess I didn't really fully understand kind of the implications of her decisions.
Sure. No, that
So
makes sense.
yeah, so now it's kind of like okay, I wouldn't be doing the things that she was doing. Um, I guess I now that I'm older, I can see. why it's so frustrating. And watching it like play out, yeah, it was a different experience. Still disappointing, just more so now than it was then.
The one thing I want to give to the credit of the film before, and I guess this might be more credit to the book, is I do think she was a realistic 26-year-old character, meaning that as a 24-year-old person, I am also a little aimless and figuring things out, and I think that's great to see represented on film. I feel like we see a lot of like kind of late mid 20-year-olds in movies and TV, and they just seem to have shit together, except for their relationships. So the idea that, Finn had to go back to her families and live with them and kind of figure things out slowly while she's still working on a paper that she's been working on for years, it's just kind of like reassuring. I was like, oh, okay, I'm fine. So it was nice to see, a 26-year-old character who more represented my anxieties and feelings than usual. But that was one of the fewer highlights of the film and his character. But before we end, do you two have anything else that you thought of the film that you wanted to say? I know it's kind of a thin film overall, but yeah.
I think the biggest thing that that I took away from the film was what we had touched on earlier in, I guess, the dichotomy of male and female stories and how they're represented and how they're viewed, and I guess the ways in which women and I guess their career goals and their independence and their agency, all of that can be jeopardized or compromised when they get married or they have children in a way that it doesn't happen to men. And it reminded me of something that was said in a film that I watched I think about a month ago, in How to Be Single, which is, I mean, that focuses on women, but it's directed by a man, ironically. There was a line that was, I guess, more or less like society makes it really difficult for women to pursue their dreams after they've had children. And I don't think that's entirely coincidental. And I think that's something that in a film that was made 20 years ago, they're still talking about that. Nothing has changed. I think, I guess, like I said before, the film there wasn't a lot of meat to it, but the things that it made me think about were really, really hefty, I guess.
Oh, that's awesome. So great. So thank you, everybody, for joining us again. Next month, we will be taking a look at Mira Nair's The Namesake, and films about male coming-of-age stories told from the female perspective. And we're going to see, if there's any differences with that, with the typical coming-of-age stories. And I would also like to make a quick correction of something I said at the beginning, and I don't know where this mistake came out of, but I said Things We Lost in the Fire was directed by Claire Denis. It is not. It is Suzanne Bier, and I have no idea why Claire Denis came out of my mouth, because I don't think I've seen any films by her. So apologies, I'm working a little asleep. But make sure to follow us on Twitter at TYFOfficial. Gabby and Alana, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Gabrielle Adele.
And I'm on Twitter at Lane Notlon, LaneNotLawn.
And I'm on Twitter at AllisonAJ. Follow us on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Tumblr, we're everywhere. So make sure to give us a follow, listen to the podcast. Hopefully it will be on iTunes soon. And awesome. Thank you again for checking us out, and make sure to tune in next month for The Namesake. Have a good one.